The sun was blazing high over the city, reflecting off the glossy black surface of a brand-new Lamborghini Huracan. The car purred like a wildcat, turning heads as it glided effortlessly through the bustling streets. Behind the wheel was Amara, a 25-year-old with an undeniable presence, confident, sharp, and unapologetically herself. She had worked tirelessly for years, juggling 2 jobs, pouring every ounce of determination into chasing her dreams. Finally, this car was her reward, a symbol of her hard-earned success. Amara's deep brown skin glowed in the sunlight as her curls bounced with every turn of her head. People stared, some with admiration, others with envy. She knew what they were thinking. How did she get that car? But she didn't care. She had earned it fair and square, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that pride away from her. As she pulled into a gas station to fuel up, her mind wandered to her next destination, a charity gala downtown, where she had been invited to speak about her journey from struggling to thriving. Amara's success story was more than just hers. It was a testament to her community and her late grandmother, who had always told her, "When you work hard and stay true to yourself, the world will make room for you." While Amara filled the tank, a patrol car pulled into the station. Officer Garrett Reynolds stepped out, his broad shoulders and crisp uniform making him look like he walked straight out of a police recruitment ad. Garrett had been a cop for over 10 years, and his reputation in the force was as spotless as his shiny badge. But there was something behind his practiced smile that rubbed people the wrong way, a coldness in his eyes, a quiet arrogance that made you question his intentions. Garrett's gaze locked onto the Lamborghini, then shifted to Amara. He took in the scene, her confident demeanor, the sleek car, and immediately made assumptions. He didn't see Amara as the accomplished woman she was. Instead, his mind spun a narrative, one rooted in bias. Amara noticed him staring and gave a polite nod. "Nice ride," Garrett said, his tone casual but laced with something she couldn't quite place. "Thanks," she replied, keeping her tone light but guarded. She had been in enough situations to recognize when she was being sized up. "What's a car like that doing in this neighborhood?" he asked, his voice carrying a subtle edge. Amara arched an eyebrow, her patience already thinning. "It's my car. I live around here." Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Must have cost a fortune." "It did," Amara said firmly, meeting his gaze. She wasn't about to let anyone make her feel small. The tension was palpable, but Amara refused to back down. Garrett, however, wasn't ready to let it go. As she finished fueling and prepared to leave, he spoke again. "Mind if I see some ID?" he asked, leaning casually against the patrol car. Amara froze, her hands gripping the gas nozzle. She turned slowly, her voice calm but unwavering. "Why? I haven't done anything wrong. It's just routine," Garrett said, shrugging. "You know, making sure everything's legit." Amara felt the familiar wave of frustration and exhaustion. She'd worked too hard to be treated like a suspect for simply existing. But she also knew better than to escalate. With a steady hand, she pulled out her wallet and handed him her ID. Garrett examined it, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Amara Johnson," he read aloud. "Nice name. Mind if I take a closer look at the car? Just making sure it's registered properly." Amara clenched her jaw, but nodded. "Knock yourself out." As Garrett circled the car, his fingers brushed against the door handles, the tires, the hood. It felt invasive, and Amara's stomach churned. She wanted to demand answers, to ask why he was doing this, but she knew that standing her ground too firmly could spiral into something worse. After what felt like an eternity, Garrett handed back her ID. "Looks good," he said, though his tone suggested he still didn't believe her. He tipped his hat and walked back to his patrol car, leaving Amara fuming but relieved it hadn't gone further. Little did she know, that was only the beginning. Later that night, after the gala, Amara parked her Lamborghini in her driveway and headed inside her small but beautifully decorated home. Exhausted but content, she double-checked her security system before heading to bed. She had no idea that Garrett wasn't done with her. The next morning, Amara stepped outside to head to an early meeting, only to freeze in shock. Her driveway was empty. The Lamborghini was gone. Panic surged through her as she frantically checked her surroundings, but there was no sign of her prized possession. Her heart raced as she called the police to report the theft. When the officer on the other end asked her to describe the car, she could barely get the words out. "It's a black Lamborghini Huracan. I just got it a few weeks ago." "Ma'am, we'll send someone over to take a statement," the officer assured her. But before they arrived, her phone buzzed with an alert. A notification from her car's GPS tracking app. She opened it with trembling hands and stared at the location. The Lamborghini wasn't far. It was parked behind a nearby precinct building. Confusion gave way to anger as Amara realized what this meant. She grabbed her keys and headed straight for the location, her mind racing with questions. Why was her car there? Who had taken it? As she pulled up to the precinct, her eyes widened in disbelief. There it was, her Lamborghini, parked brazenly in a reserved spot. And standing next to it, leaning casually against the driver's door, was Garrett Reynolds, his arms crossed and a smug grin on his face. Amara's blood boiled. She threw the car into park, her hands shaking as she stepped out. This wasn't just theft, it was a challenge. And she wasn't about to back down. Amara's heart pounded as she strode toward the precinct parking lot. Her mind raced with disbelief and anger, but she forced herself to stay composed. She knew that storming in and losing her temper would only work against her. She needed answers, and more importantly, she needed her car back. Garrett noticed her approach and pushed off the car, standing tall and folding his arms across his chest. That smug grin of his didn't waver. If anything, it deepened. "Morning," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness. Amara stopped a few feet away, narrowing her eyes at him. "What is my car doing here?" Garrett tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Your car? Are you sure about that?" Amara felt her hands clench into fists, but she kept them at her sides. "Yes, I'm sure. I reported it stolen this morning. And now I find it here, parked like it belongs to you. Care to explain?" Garrett took a step closer, his expression shifting just slightly, enough to reveal a hint of annoyance. "Watch your tone, ma'am. This isn't how you talk to an officer of the law." Amara straightened her shoulders, refusing to let him intimidate her. "I'll use whatever tone I want when someone steals my property. Now, are you going to explain yourself, or should I go inside and report you directly to your superiors?" Garrett smirked, leaning casually against the car again. "Go ahead. But before you do, maybe check your registration." Something about it seemed off. Her stomach dropped. She knew every document for the car was in order. She had double-checked everything when she bought it. Still, his words planted a seed of doubt, and she hated that he could so easily rattle her. "I don't know what game you're playing," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not going anywhere until this gets sorted out." Garrett shrugged, clearly unfazed. "Suit yourself. But don't forget, you're on my turf now." Amara's eyes flicked toward the precinct building. Officers moved in and out, some glancing curiously in her direction, but not stopping. She wondered how many of them knew what was going on and how many would care if they did. She took a deep breath, pulling out her phone. Without breaking eye contact, she dialed the non-emergency police line. Garrett raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "Hello, I'd like to report a stolen vehicle," Amara said when the operator answered. "I'd already called earlier, but I found it. The problem is, it's parked at a police precinct, and I believe an officer may have taken it." The operator hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Ma'am, can you clarify? Are you saying an officer is in possession of your vehicle?" "Yes," Amara said firmly. "I'm standing here looking at it right now, and the officer who took it is standing next to it." "Stay where you are, ma'am. I'll escalate this to the appropriate department. Someone will come out to assist you shortly." Amara ended the call and slipped her phone back into her pocket. Garrett was still watching her, his expression unreadable now. She felt the weight of his gaze but refused to look away. "Bold move," he said finally. "But don't think for a second that it'll work out the way you think it will." Amara ignored him, folding her arms and leaning against a nearby lamppost. She didn't trust herself to speak without saying something that might escalate the situation. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, her mind racing with questions. Why would Garrett risk stealing her car? Did he think she wouldn't fight back? Or was there something else at play? She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her car, it was about her. Eventually, another officer stepped out of the precinct. He was older, with a stern face and a no-nonsense demeanor. His name tag read Lieutenant Harris. Amara straightened as he approached. "Miss Johnson," he asked, glancing between her and Garrett. "That's me," she said, relief flooding her voice. "I'm Lieutenant Harris. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding regarding your vehicle." Amara gestured toward the Lamborghini. "There's no misunderstanding. That's my car, and it was stolen from my driveway last night. I tracked it here, and now it's parked in this lot with Officer Reynolds standing next to it like it's his." Harris frowned, turning to Garrett. "Reynolds, what's this about?" Garrett shrugged, his tone casual. "The car seems suspicious, so I had it brought in for inspection. I was planning to log it later this morning, but it looks like Ms. Johnson beat me to it." "Suspicious?" Amara repeated, her voice rising. "What about my car is suspicious? It's registered in my name, and all the paperwork is in order." "Calm down, ma'am," Harris said, holding up a hand. He turned back to Garrett. "Did you run the plates?" "Not yet," Garrett admitted, his expression unreadable. Harris sighed, clearly irritated. "We'll sort this out right now." He pulled out a tablet and began typing in the car's license plate number. Amara held her breath as she watched him work, praying there wouldn't be any unexpected issues. After a few moments, Harris nodded. "The car's registered to Ms. Amara Johnson. Everything checks out." Amara exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief, but her victory was short-lived. However, Harris continued, his tone cautious, "Reynolds is right about one thing. This car does raise some flags. A vehicle like this in a neighborhood like yours, it's not exactly common." Amara's relief turned to anger. "What does my neighborhood have to do with anything? Are you saying I don't deserve to own a nice car because of where I live?" "That's not what I'm saying," Harris replied quickly. "But you have to understand. It's our job to investigate anything that seems out of the ordinary. We're just doing our due diligence." Amara shook her head, her frustration boiling over. "This isn't about due diligence. This is about assumptions. If I didn't look the way I do, you wouldn't have given my car a second glance." Harris hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Garrett, on the other hand, looked like he was enjoying every second of the exchange. "Well," Harris said finally, "the car is yours, and there's no evidence of wrongdoing. I'll make sure it's returned to you immediately." "That's the least you can do," Amara muttered, her tone biting. As Harris walked away to retrieve the keys, Garrett leaned in closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You got lucky today, but don't think this is over." Amara glared at him, her voice equally quiet but no less firm. "It's over when I say it's over, and trust me, I'm not done yet." Garrett chuckled, stepping back as Harris returned with the keys. Amara snatched them from his hand, her grip tight. Without another word, she climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar hum of the engine filling her ears. As she drove away, her mind was already racing. This wasn't just about getting her car back. It was about making sure Garrett and anyone like him couldn't pull something like this again. She didn't know how, but she was going to fight back. And this time, she was playing to win. Amara drove through the city, her grip tight on the steering wheel, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. Every time she thought about Garrett's smug grin and the cryptic warning he had whispered, her anger flared again. It wasn't just about her car anymore. It was about standing up for herself and making sure this officer didn't abuse his power against anyone else. But how could she fight someone like Garrett, who seemed untouchable within his badge and uniform? When she finally pulled into her driveway, she turned off the engine but stayed seated, staring blankly at the house in front of her. Her heart was still racing, not from fear, but from determination. She wouldn't let this slide. She couldn't. The next day, Amara decided to start digging. She knew she couldn't rely on the police to hold Garrett accountable, not when it seemed like some of them, including Lieutenant Harris, were willing to excuse his behavior. She called up her best friend Tasha, someone who was as tenacious as she was loyal. "You won't believe what happened," Amara said the moment Tasha picked up. "Try me," Tasha replied, her tone already laced with concern. Amara recounted the entire ordeal, from discovering her car missing to finding it in the precinct parking lot and the confrontation with Garrett. Tasha listened quietly, but Amara could feel her anger building through the phone. "That man has some nerve," Tasha said when Amara finished. "You're telling me he just took your car and thought you'd do nothing about it?" "Nah, we're not letting this slide. I need to figure out what I'm dealing with," Amara said. "I don't trust going through official channels. They'll just cover for him." "Lucky for you, I know a guy who's good at finding things people want to keep hidden," Tasha said. "Let me make a few calls. In the meantime, you need to be careful. If Garrett's bold enough to do this, who knows what else he's capable of." Amara nodded, even though Tasha couldn't see her. "I will. Just don't take too long, okay?" By the end of the day, Tasha had connected Amara with a private investigator named Marcus. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, with a knack for uncovering dirt in places no one thought to look. Amara met him at a small cafe on the other side of town, where they sat in a corner booth, speaking in hushed tones. "You've got a tough one on your hands," Marcus said after Amara explained the situation. "Cops like Garrett don't act alone. If he's this confident, it's because he knows he's protected." "I don't care how protected he is," Amara said. "I want to know everything, how he operates, who's covering for him, and why he thought he could steal from me." Marcus nodded, pulling out a notepad. "All right, I'll start by looking into his records, complaints, disciplinary actions, anything that might point to a pattern of behavior. I'll also see if I can find out what kind of connections he has in the precinct." "Thank you," Amara said, her voice firm. "I'll pay whatever it takes." "It's not about the money," Marcus replied. "People like Garrett give good cops a bad name. If we can expose him, it's worth it." As Marcus began his investigation, Amara started noticing strange things. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Cars she didn't recognize would drive slowly past her house, and she started receiving anonymous phone calls late at night. Each time she answered, there was only silence on the other end. She mentioned it to Tasha, who immediately insisted she stay at her place for a few days. Amara reluctantly agreed, packing a bag and leaving her house behind. "You think it's Garrett?" Tasha asked as they settled into her living room. "Who else would it be?" Amara replied. "He knows I'm not letting this go. This is his way of trying to scare me off." "Well, if he's messing with the wrong woman," Tasha said, her tone fierce. "We're going to see this through, no matter what." Meanwhile, Marcus was making progress. He called Amara a few days later with an update. "Your guy Garrett has a history," Marcus said. "I found multiple complaints against him. Excessive force, harassment, even tampering with evidence, but none of them went anywhere. They were all dismissed by the precinct." "Why am I not surprised?" Amara muttered. "It gets worse," Marcus continued. "I dug into his financials. There are some irregularities, deposits that don't match his salary, connections to people with shady reputations. I think he's involved in something bigger than just harassing citizens." Amara's stomach turned. She had suspected Garrett was corrupt, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. "What do we do with this information?" she asked. "We build a case," Marcus said, "but we'll need more. If we're going to take him down, we have to make it airtight." As the days passed, the tension grew. Amara knew she was getting closer to the truth, but so did Garrett. One night, as she and Tasha were returning to Tasha's house, they found the front door ajar. "Stay behind me," Tasha whispered, pulling out a can of pepper spray from her bag. They stepped inside cautiously, their eyes scanning the room. Nothing seemed out of place at first, but then Amara noticed a note on the coffee table. It was a single sheet of paper with 3 words scrawled across it in bold, black letters. ****stio or ELC****. Amara's hands shook as she read the note. She knew this was Garrett's way of sending a message, but it only made her more determined. "This isn't over," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "Not even close." Amara sat in the dimly lit kitchen at Tasha's house, the note still clutched in her trembling hands. She wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to release the storm building inside her, but she stayed silent. Tasha paced the room, her footsteps heavy with frustration and worry. "This is too much," Tasha said, her voice breaking the silence. "First, he steals your car. And now he's breaking into my house to leave threats? This guy is dangerous, Amara. Maybe we should." "No," Amara interrupted, her tone firm. "That's exactly what he wants. He thinks he can scare us into backing down, but we're not giving him that satisfaction." Tasha stopped pacing and looked at her friend. "I admire your courage, but we have to be smart about this. If Garrett is as untouchable as he seems, we can't afford any mistakes." Amara nodded, understanding the risk but unwilling to let fear dictate her actions. "Marcus is making progress. We just need to hold on and keep digging. Garrett's going to slip up eventually." Over the next few days, Marcus continued to uncover more damning evidence against Garrett. He found connections between Garrett and a known local criminal organization, bribes, favors, and even rumors of stolen property being funneled through their network. Amara's stolen Lamborghini, it seemed, might have been part of a bigger operation. Marcus shared this information during a late-night call. "This goes deeper than I thought," he said, his voice heavy. "Garrett isn't just a bad cop, he's part of a corrupt system, and if we're going to expose him, we'll need to hit them all at once. Otherwise, they'll just bury it." Amara's heart raced as she processed his words. "How did we do that?" she asked. "I'm working on it," Marcus replied, "but you need to stay alert. If they know we're closing in, they'll get desperate." Desperation was exactly what Garrett was feeling. He was no longer the calm, cocky man who had smirked at Amara in the precinct. His carefully constructed world was beginning to crack, and he could feel the walls closing in. The anonymous phone calls to Amara became more frequent, and she started noticing unfamiliar faces around Tasha's neighborhood. Men who lingered in cars or stood on corners, their eyes following her every move. One evening, as Amara drove home from a meeting with Marcus, she noticed headlights in her rearview mirror. The car behind her seemed to be following too closely, matching her every turn. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Amara made a sharp turn onto a side street, hoping to lose the car. When it followed, she knew she wasn't imagining things. Her hands tightened on the wheel as she sped up, her mind racing for a plan. She spotted a gas station up ahead and decided to pull in. If they wanted to confront her, they'd have to do it in a public place. She parked near the pumps and stepped out, pretending to inspect her tire. The car that had been following her drove past, but slowed as it did, the driver glaring at her through the window. It was Garrett. Amara's stomach churned, but she refused to look away. She stared back at him, her gaze unwavering, until he finally drove off. When she got back to Tasha's house, she locked every door and window, her nerves frayed but her resolve stronger than ever. She called Marcus and told him what had happened. "He's getting reckless," Marcus said. "That's a good thing. It means he's scared. But it also means he's dangerous. Be extra careful, Amara. We're close, but we're not there yet." The next morning, Amara woke to a message from Marcus. He had set up a meeting with a journalist who was interested in exposing corruption within the police force. Marcus believed that going public with the story might be the only way to bring Garrett and his network to justice. Amara met the journalist, a woman named Nina, at a quiet cafe. Nina was sharp and quick-witted, asking pointed questions and taking meticulous notes as Amara recounted everything that had happened. "This is explosive," Nina said, her eyes alight with determination. "But you understand the risks, right? Once this goes public, you'll have a target on your back." "I already do," Amara replied. "If it means stopping Garrett, it's worth it." As the plan to expose Garrett took shape, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The tension in the air was palpable, and every step felt like a move in a high-stakes chess game. She knew Garrett wouldn't go down without a fight, and she braced herself for the storm that was sure to come. Amara could feel the weight of the day as she left the cafe, the meeting with Nina lingering in her thoughts. She had done everything she could to lay the groundwork for Garrett's downfall, but the stakes were higher now than ever. As she walked to her car, She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the street, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Shaking off her nerves, she climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. As she pulled out onto the road, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Amara, we've got a problem," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "What now?" she asked, gripping the steering wheel. "I was digging into Garrett's financials again, and I found something new. There's a second account tied to him, but it's under someone else's name, a woman named Vanessa. The strange thing is, she's listed as a relative." Amara frowned, trying to piece it together. A relative. Garrett never mentioned family. "That's what makes it so odd," Marcus continued. "Vanessa's record is squeaky clean, but the account shows a lot of suspicious activity. Large cash deposits, transfers to offshore accounts, and this is the kicker, payments to certain people within the department." Amara's heart sank as the implications hit her. "You're saying Garrett has an accomplice?" "Not just an accomplice," Marcus replied. "She might be the mastermind. Garrett's bold, but he doesn't strike me as the brains behind an operation this big. Vanessa could be pulling the strings." The revelation sent a chill through Amara. She had been so focused on Garrett that she hadn't considered the possibility of someone else being involved. The scope of their fight was growing, and the odds felt even more daunting. Later that evening, Marcus called again, this time with more startling news. "Vanessa isn't just anyone, Amara. She's Garrett's wife." Amara nearly dropped the phone. "Wife? He's married." "Apparently," Marcus said. "But here's the twist. She's been living in another state under a different last name. It's like she doesn't exist on paper, except for the financial trails. Whatever they're involved in, they've gone to great lengths to cover their tracks." Amara felt her frustration boil over. Every time they got closer to understanding Garrett's world, it seemed to expand into something more convoluted and dangerous. But she couldn't back down now. Determined to dig deeper, Amara decided to drive to Marcus' office the next morning to review the evidence in person. She didn't want to leave any stone unturned, and working together would help them connect the dots faster. As she neared Marcus's building, her car suddenly sputtered and lurched. The dashboard lights flickered, and the engine died. Confused, she coasted to the side of the road and got out to inspect. The car had been running perfectly earlier. There was no reason for it to break down now. Kneeling by the hood, she noticed something strange, a small device attached near the engine. Her stomach dropped as she realized it wasn't a standard car part. It was a tracker. Panic set in as she scanned her surroundings. Had someone sabotaged her car? Were they watching her now? She reached for her phone to call Marcus, but before she could dial, a black SUV pulled up behind her. The doors swung open, and two men stepped out. They weren't in uniform, but their authoritative demeanor screamed law enforcement, or something close to it. "Miss Carter," one of them said, his tone cold and commanding. "We need you to come with us." Amara stood her ground, her heart pounding. "Who are you?" "We're associates of Officer Garrett," the man replied, a smirk playing on his lips. "He has a message for you." Amara's mind raced. She had no intention of going anywhere with them, but she was alone and outnumbered. As the men approached, she took a step back, trying to think of a way to stall. Before she could act, a car screeched to a halt nearby, and Marcus jumped out, holding up his phone like a weapon. "I've got this whole thing recorded," he shouted. "Touch her, and it's going straight to the press." The men hesitated, exchanging a look. Whatever authority they thought they had evaporated in the face of Marcus's boldness. Without another word, they climbed back into their SUV and sped off, leaving Amara and Marcus standing in the middle of the road. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, rushing to her side. Amara nodded, though her hands were still shaking. "That was too close. They know we're onto them." "Good," Marcus said, his jaw set. "That means we're making progress, but we need to move faster. If they're getting this aggressive, it's only a matter of time before they escalate." As they drove to Marcus' office together, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that the game had changed. Garrett wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was protecting a web of lies that stretched further than she had ever imagined. And now, with Vanessa in the picture, the the stakes were higher than ever. Amara and Marcus arrived at his office, the tension between them palpable as they prepared to confront the storm head-on. The evidence they had gathered was damning, but it wasn't enough. Garrett's network of corruption seemed impenetrable, and Vanessa's involvement made everything feel even more convoluted. Amara's mind raced with the weight of what was at stake, not just for personal vindication, but the chance to bring justice to countless others Garrett had wronged. Inside the office, Marcus pulled up the files on his laptop, showing Amara the trail of transactions tied to Garrett and Vanessa. Each piece of data was another crack in their facade, but it wasn't enough to bring the entire structure down. They needed irrefutable proof, something that couldn't be dismissed or buried. That's when Marcus revealed his trump card. "I hacked into Garrett's police-issued laptop," Marcus admitted, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "There's a folder labeled Closed Cases that isn't connected to the department's network. It's encrypted, but if we can crack it, we might find the smoking gun." Amara's eyes widened. "You could get in serious trouble for this. Are you sure it's worth the risk?" "It's not just about Garrett anymore," Marcus replied. "This is bigger than him, bigger than both of us. If we don't act, they'll keep getting away with it." They worked tirelessly, the glow of the computer screen illuminating their determined faces as Marcus chipped away at the encryption. Hours passed, and the tension in the room grew unbearable. Finally, with a triumphant click, the folder opened. What they found inside made Amara's blood run cold. Dozens of video files were stored within, each one labeled with dates and cryptic titles. As they clicked on the first file, the screen filled with footage from a police body camera. Garrett's face appeared, his expression smug as he pulled over a young black man in a sleek sports car. The exchange that followed was chilling. Garrett fabricated charges, confiscated the car, and drove off, all while laughing about his abuse of power. "This isn't just about the Lamborghini," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. "He's been running this scheme for years." One by one, they played the videos, each one revealing another victim, another stolen vehicle, another blatant abuse of authority. But the most damning piece of evidence came near the end, a recorded conversation between Garrett and Vanessa. In the video, they discussed their plan to launder the stolen cars through a network of fake buyers and offshore accounts, all while using their position to silence anyone who got too close. Amara felt a mix of triumph and fury as the full scope of their operation came into focus. This was the evidence they needed, the irrefutable proof that would bring Garrett and Vanessa down. But just as they were about to save the files, the screen went black. "What just happened?" Amara asked, panic rising in her chest. Marcus frantically typed on the keyboard. "They must have detected the breach. The systems locked me out." Before they could react, the sound of screeching tires echoed outside. Marcus's office window offered a clear view of the street below, where a fleet of unmarked cars was pulling up. Garrett stepped out of the lead vehicle, his face twisted in anger as he barked orders to the men surrounding him. "They're here," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've got to go, now." Grabbing the laptop, they bolted out the back door, narrowly avoiding the officers storming the building. As they fled into the night, Amara's mind raced. They had the evidence, but without access to the files, it was useless. They needed a new plan, and they needed it fast. They found refuge in a safe house Marcus had prepared for emergencies. There, they regrouped, trying to figure out their next move. Amara's phone buzzed with an unexpected call from Nina, her voice shaky as she delivered shocking news. "Vanessa just turned herself in," Nina said. "She's offering a full confession in exchange for immunity. She says Garrett forced her into the scheme and that she has more evidence to prove it." Amara was stunned. Vanessa's betrayal of Garrett was the final twist she hadn't seen coming. It was a calculated move to save herself, but it also gave them the leverage they needed. With Vanessa's cooperation, they could finally expose Garrett's crimes and dismantle his network of corruption. The next day, Amara and Marcus met with the district attorney, presenting their findings alongside Vanessa's testimony. It was the culmination of weeks of fear, determination, and unrelenting pursuit of justice. As Garrett was arrested in front of his peers, his once confident facade crumbled. The man who had terrorized so many was finally brought to justice. But as Amara walked away from the courthouse, a nagging feeling lingered. Vanessa's sudden decision to turn herself in felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. Marcus noticed her hesitation and asked what was on her mind. "I don't think this is over," Amara said, her voice low. "Vanessa might have turned on Garrett, but she's not innocent. There's more to her story, and I'm going to find out what it is." Marcus nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Then let's keep digging. Justice isn't just about catching the bad guys, it's about making sure they can't hurt anyone else." As they walked into the sunset, the weight of their victory was tempered by the knowledge that their fight wasn't over. Garrett was behind bars, but the shadows he had operated in were still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And Amara wasn't about to stop until every last secret was brought to light.